July. 6 in the morning, and the air already felt like a classroom in September, with the windows shut. Thick, still, waiting. I stepped outside with my coffee, and the thermometer on the porch read 29 degrees. By noon, it would be 38. It had been like this for 11 days straight, and my garden was telling me about it in ways I didn't want to hear. The lettuce went first. It bolted in the second week of heat, sending up pale stalks overnight like flags of surrender. Then the beans curled inward, leaves folding along the midrib the way a student closes a textbook when they've given up on the chapter. By day 14, the zucchini, 3 big healthy plants I'd been watering twice a day, collapsed. Not slowly. I came out one morning and they were flat on the ground, leaves gray and papery, stems soft at the base. Root rot. I had drowned them trying to keep them cool. That's the part I need to be honest about. When the heat came, I panicked. I doubled my watering. Morning and evening, 20 minutes per bed, hose running full. I could hear the water hitting the dry surface and sizzling for a second before it soaked in. Or didn't soak in. Because by the second week, parts of the soil had gone hydrophobic again, shedding water like a waxed table. I thought more water meant more help. What I was doing was flooding shallow soil in hot weather, creating a warm, wet layer where fungus thrives and roots suffocate. I knew this. I'd taught a whole unit on root respiration, oxygen diffusion in saturated soil, the physics of waterlogging. I could have drawn the diagram from memory. I drew it anyway, on the back of a seed packet, sitting on the porch on the 15th evening, trying to understand why my knowledge hadn't stopped me from making the same mistake the knowledge described. By the third week, roughly 80% of what I'd planted was gone or going. The beds looked like an abandoned project. Brown stems, dry edges, mulch blown thin by hot wind. That particular silence a garden gets when nothing is growing, and nothing is about to. I walked the rows each morning out of habit, coffee in hand, and felt the way I used to feel after a lesson that didn't land. 25 faces staring at me, and I could tell none of it had reached them. Same preparation, same effort, same emptiness at the end. Then I went to get the wheelbarrow from behind the shed. I hadn't been back there in weeks. It's a narrow strip along the north side, shaded by the shed wall, partly covered by the neighbor's maple, a spot where I dumped extra leaf mulch in the fall and forgotten about it. When I turned the corner, I stopped. A cherry tomato plant was growing there. I don't remember planting it. I think a seedling got knocked off the potting bench in May and rooted in the mulch where it fell. It was about hip height, dark green, covered in clusters of small fruit, some already turning red. The leaves were firm and slightly waxy, catching the dappled light that filtered through the maple. Not a single one was curled or wilted. The mulch around the base was still damp. I could see it, a dark ring of moisture around the stem, like the plant had its own private water supply. I crouched down and pushed my fingers into the soil. Cool, dark, soft. In the middle of the worst heat I'd seen in 3 years, this patch of ground felt like early spring. I picked one of the ripe tomatoes and held it for a moment. Warm from the vine but not from the sun, this plant had never been in direct light for more than a few hours a day. It had grown in shade, in mulch, in soil I never improved and never watered. The tomato was small, no bigger than my thumbnail, but the taste was sharp and sweet, in a way that my carefully managed beds hadn't produced all season. A sparrow landed on the shed gutter above me, chirped once, and went quiet. We stayed there together in the shade for a minute, me with a tomato in my hand, and the bird watching from above, both of us taking refuge in the one cool spot left. Over the next 3 weeks, that plant gave me more fruit than the rest of the garden combined. I picked a handful every couple of days, enough to fill a small bowl, enough for a salad with basil from the one herb pot that survived on the porch. Enough to remind me, every time I carried that bowl inside, that something was still working, even when I couldn't see it from the kitchen window. The roots had gone deep into soil that stayed moist under layers of decomposing leaves. The shade kept the ground temperature around 15 degrees cooler than the open beds. I checked with a soil thermometer one afternoon, curious whether my guess was right. The mulch held moisture without me adding any. Every condition that plant needed had been in place since the previous autumn, built by leaves and time and nothing else. I spent that summer trying to save a garden by doing more. More water, more attention, more intervention. More of myself poured into beds that were already drowning in me. The plant that made it did so by having less of me and more of what the spot already offered. In a classroom, I used to call this differentiation. You don't teach every student the same way, because every student sits in a different chair, with a different window and a different amount of light. I spent 30 years understanding that principle with children, and 3 summers failing to apply it to plants. That cherry tomato wasn't stronger than the others. It wasn't a better variety or a luckier seed. It landed in a place that matched what it needed, and nobody interfered. Adaptation isn't about toughness. It's about fit, the quiet negotiation between a living thing and the exact spot where it stands. I'm still thinking about how much water I was pouring onto those beds that summer, morning and evening, convinced I was helping. How much of it actually reached the roots? That question led me somewhere I didn't expect.